What is up, Blue Demon fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Blue Demon Banter Podcast, brought to you by WeAreDePaul. We have a fantastic episode in store today. We have the great Scott Phillips on with us, and we also have one of the most in tune college basketball guys on this episode, Jeff Borzello, who's been around the college basketball landscape for a very, very long time. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you for taking the time. I know busy time of year, get into conference play for most of these teams and everything. Thank you for taking the time. And Scott, man, great to have you on again. This is, I think, the third time you've been on this season, so great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Joey. Appreciate it.
No problem. Let's just get right into it now. It's been, a couple of days since DePaul has last played. Their last game was last Saturday, or last Sunday, excuse me, against UConn. Great first half performance. Second half, not so much. And UConn kind of ran away with it there in the second half. I guess we'll start with Scott here. Scott, what did you see from DePaul in that game against UConn last Sunday?
Well, I think there's some encouraging signs based on the first half. We've talked so much this season about DePaul upgrading their athleticism, upgrading the size of this roster so that they could compete with the upper echelon teams of the Big East. And we saw that for 20 minutes, but then the second 20 minutes was another story. You saw a UConn team that was motivated. They had a great game plan in the second half to get more involvement from Alex Caravan. And again, you just kind of saw the difference in talent disparity that we've talked about so much. This Blue Demons team continues to struggle at times to score, particularly against long and athletic defenses. And, maintaining for 40 minutes has been something that head coach Chris Holtman has talked about all season. We just didn't see it there in the second half for this one either.
Yeah, I thought the first half, I thought they played well. I thought that was a good effort by them defensively. We saw Brandon Macklin make a major impact in that first half. And
Definitely.
like you mentioned, it's just the talent wise, obviously UConn just that much more talented. And UConn's one of the best teams in the country here. And I know we'll get to it with Jeff, and Jeff knows, UConn's one of the best teams here in the country. But yeah, I thought DePaul in that first half played well, but at the end of the day, they just didn't have enough juice, didn't have enough effort to sustain for that 40 minutes. And I want to turn it over now to Jeff. Jeff, you've mentioned you've seen a couple DePaul games. Obviously, rough start to Big East play, playing at St. John's in Queens and then playing UConn. I guess what has been your analysis of DePaul in the games that you have watched from them?
Well, it's funny. I mean, like anecdotally, I was like, all right, there because I watched the first half of the UConn game. I'm like, okay, and then I mean, I watched a little bit of the St. John's game. They were not very good for long stretches of that one. So anecdotally, I'm like, okay, this team seems to have made strides from last year. And I looked at their KenPom numbers this morning, and they ended last year at 122. Right now, they're at 121. So, but to me, they look like they have more talent 1 through 10, 1 through 9. Their roster as a whole is better. It seems like they've had to, I don't know, kind of chop and change the rotation a lot more than I think Chris Holtman would want to, whether that's due to injury. I mean, it seems like half the roster's been injured for, 2, 3 games here and there. But the guys, I mean, like I think he's Cruz McClure has been pretty good. He's shown more than I expected going into the year. Fabian Flores, a guy who was not expected to play at all this season, has kind of shown flashes. It seems like, I mean, I'd be optimistic about him moving forward. The problem is like Scott said before, I mean, there was an effort to upgrade the athleticism, upgrade the talent level on the roster. When one of those guys is, a Caleb Banks, you can't really afford an off night from him when you're playing the best team in the league. And he had an off night against UConn. There might not be a team in the league that went, that beats UConn this year. They're going to probably suffer 1 or 2 losses. So, for DePaul to hold their own for a half and those young guys kind of go in there and not really, show a ton of fear. I thought that was a step forward. Again, I mean, it's they had, maybe the most brutal start any team in the league could have. And I think that's probably why their KenPom numbers, I mean, their offensive numbers just cratered against those 2 teams. If they started against, Providence and Georgetown to start league play, they could be in the top 90 in KenPom or something like that. And there's obvious strides being made. So I do think the talent has been upgraded. I think the depth's been upgraded. I just think that if they had stayed healthy and if they stay healthy moving forward, I think they're gonna end this season in a better position than they ended last season.
Yeah, the health is something that DePaul is dealing with right now. Obviously, Macklin, missed a few games with the shoulder. It seems like he's kind of getting back, which is good. Teo Pierre Justin still dealing with that shoulder. He's a game time decision for, tomorrow against Villanova, according to Holtman today at his media availability. But the bigger news, I guess, is Jeremy Lorenz, who, more of a reserve role with DePaul after transferring from Watford last year. But it looks like he's going to be out for the season here. He's been dealing with the lingering hip issue, and it seems like season-ending hip surgery is on the table. And talking to Holtman today, it kind of seems like that's kind of the way DePaul is going. So I guess Scott, with the news that Lorenz is going to be out for the season, I guess what does that do for DePaul's rotation? Does anyone step up in his place? It's just shorter rotation. Kind of how do you see this play out now?
Well, it certainly puts more on their backup centers, and that puts more on Flores and Kaman Maker. Jeremy Lorenz was looked at as a guy who could come in and play a little bit of the five, play a little bit of the four. He had physicality that could, match up inside against Big East players while also switching onto the perimeter against a couple smaller guys. He was a ball mover, as Chris Holtman described him, who was intelligent within the half-court offense and seemed to know his place and when to take shots and when to make the correct reads on passes. He struggled at times finishing on the interior, and I'm sure he would be the first to admit that, as Chris Holtman looked to him as somebody that needed to improve on the interior with finishing. But, this is a valuable loss for DePaul. They wanted to get deeper going into Big East play for this season. Last year when they faced the Ryan Kalkbrenners and the Zuby Ejiofor's of the world, they just got manhandled inside, particularly when the second unit was on the floor. So to lose someone that you were relying on for consistent minutes, even if it was 10 to 15 a night, who could come in, give a couple fouls, move the ball offensively on the other end, it's a big strain on the rotation. And you have to look to guys like Flores and Maker to earn those minutes and to kind of make up for that.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Fabian. I know Jeff and you both alluded to that. I'm excited to see Fabian the rest of the season. I think he's shown some good things, but um, obviously he's going to just keep improving. And I think seeing how he improves against these Big East caliber centers, the Zubis of the world and the Reeds of the world, like that's going to be big for him. And I'm excited to see how he does moving forward, especially when he plays them a second time, because obviously he faced them the first time the past couple of weeks. So interesting for DePaul, but I want to turn it over now, big picture, Big East play. Jeff obviously knows a lot about the Big East, and I just want to get your thoughts. Who has been the biggest surprise team for you in the Big East over, the first two games of conference play?
And I think it has, in general, I think it's Seton Hall. Before their loss to Villanova, I think we're talking about Shaheen Holloway as right there as the coach of the year candidate with Mark Byington at Vanderbilt and Fred Hoiberg at Nebraska. This is a team that won 7 games last year. They're 10-2. They're playing kind of that gritty style that we know Shaheen Holloway loves. But they beat NC State. They won at Kansas State. They won at Providence. I think they're probably a top 4, top 5 team in the Big East. And in a year like this, that might not be enough to make the NCAA tournament. It could still be. But I think that, and then I think Villanova is. I don't know what we really expected from Kevin Willard in year one. It was kind of a thrown together roster. It didn't, some of the other new coaches around the country were, loading up in the portal and putting together teams that looked like they could be top 25 year one. Villanova wasn't that type of team. But right now, they only have 2 losses to BYU and Michigan. Metric wise, they're top 25 in most metrics. And, they're grinding it slow. They're making teams uncomfortable, but they're efficient. They shoot it well. They struck gold in the portal a little bit. A couple of unheralded guys, Bryce Lindsey, Duke Brennan. Brennan's been, maybe the best offensive rebounder in the country. Really good defensive rebounder too. And then, Willard, he did well he got a Caden Lewis, a former Kentucky commit. He's come in and been a really good point guard, both ends of the floor. Matt Hodge has been kind of the surprise, 15 against Wisconsin, 12 against Seton Hall. So, those 2 teams to me are the 3rd and 4th best teams in the league. And depending on the direction St. John's goes moving forward, Villanova could be in that conversation for the best team behind UConn. So to me, it's those 2 teams. And, I think that, Villanova's win at Seton Hall edges it for me in terms of Villanova being better than Seton Hall right now. But I think both teams are going to be squarely in the tournament mix 2 months from now.
Yeah, DePaul obviously plays Villanova Wednesday night, and it's going to be a tough task for DePaul. We've mentioned it before, but playing St. John's UConn at Villanova to start is a brutal stretch for DePaul. But Holtman has kind of embraced that. But I agree with you with Duke Brennan, and I think Duke Brennan was a nice get for them from Grand Canyon. Holtman actually said today that DePaul actually talked to Brennan to try to get him to DePaul in the transfer portal. So that's how DePaul thinks of Duke Brennan, ahead of this matchup. But yeah, Brennan, you gotta prevent him on the offensive glass. DePaul's got to box him out. He 5.1 offensive rebounds per game to start the season. That's a big number. That's a big number. So I guess Scott, we turn over to you now. What does DePaul got to do to come out victorious against Villanova on Wednesday night?
I think they got to find their flow offensively. Chris Holtman has talked so much this season about establishing that rotation, figuring out the starting lineup, but then also simplifying the offense and making things easier so that guys were reacting instead of thinking in the half court. And, it starts with the perimeter shooting. Obviously, that's been so up and down for DePaul all season long. If a guy like RJ Smith or Cruz McClure can get hot, and if somebody like Layden Blocker and CJ Gunn can just keep defenders honest and knock down three-pointers even though they've been cold, that can go a long ways to reshaping some of the looks they're getting in the half court. We've seen with the assist numbers this season for DePaul, they're a team that needs to generate their open looks via other players. They're not going to have a lot of people break guys down off the dribble and create on their own. They need to have table setters to get guys shots. And again, they got to knock down those open shots and make key plays. But for me, it's all about the offensive efficiency and how they're going to look in the half court.
Yeah, because offensive efficiency is important because, as Jeff mentioned, Villanova, really good defensive team. I believe they are top 35 in defensive efficiency, defensive rating on Ken Palm. So they're going to be up against a very good Villanova defensive team. So they have to find the rhythm, and then I think they also have to just box out. They have to win. They have to win on the glass. They have to box out Duke Brennan, Matt Hodges. They have to do that, and we'll see what happens. DePaul is, underdogs, 13.5-point underdogs. So it's an uphill battle on the road. But if they do those two things correct, offensive efficiency, they're more efficient offensively. And I think if they can box out and, limit the offensive rebounds, I think DePaul will be in a much better situation heading into, this game. But let's turn back over to Jeff. I asked you, the two most teams you've been impressed with, but I want to ask you, I know DePaul fans will like this one. What is going on there in Marquette? What's going on there in Marquette, man?
I mean, they're a mess, man. Like it's one thing for Shaka to kind of ignore the transfer portal when he's got continuity and he's got guys coming back that can win games. It's another thing for him to do it when they're losing a lot of players and when there's not much proven talent on the roster and you're in a league that has made the portal a priority and has the money to go into the portal and spend. And it's not working out. To take a step back, to me, it's still a little weird that he does not like the transfer portal, even though Tyler Kola came from the portal, but that's an entirely different discussion. But I mean, they're a mess. The whole Zaid Lowry situation, the social media aspect of that, where they quote tweeted an obvious kind of burner fan account, then changed the tweet. It's just like, what are you doing? But it's to me, it's remarkable how far they've fallen in a year. I mean, it's those kind of programs where you give the benefit of the doubt going into the year. No matter what the roster looks like, you're like, oh, well, it's Shaka. He's going to figure it out. He knows his roster better than we do. And, he's done it before. He's kind of taken guys that were role players, rotation guys, turned them into stars. He's going to do it again. And it just hasn't happened. And in, today's college basketball, if you miss on 2 or 3 evals, whether it's high school, transfer portal, whatever, your season's done. Like, you can't miss when you don't have the guy, when you don't know everyone on your roster anymore, and you miss on 2 or 3 guys, you just don't have the pieces to go to war every night. I didn't think they'd be this bad. This is their worst season. I think I looked it up the other day, since like 2000.
Wow.
This is a program that's been through a bunch of coaches since then, and they have not had this bad a season. And I don't see it getting better. As much of a distraction as the Lowry stuff was this past week, he was still, when he was playing, he was still one of their most productive players. And so now you're taking another guy away from a team that doesn't have a ton of talent in the first place. And I just don't see how it gets better for them over the next 2 months.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about DePaul's place in the Big East this year. And, Marquette's obviously on the downturn, but that middle of the pack is kind of undecided. You mentioned that top 4 hierarchy. We know what we are getting with UConn and St. John's. we've seen positive starts from Villanova and Seton Hall and even Butler to an extent. But what do you make of kind of the middle of the league and where DePaul might be able to fit into that, trailing towards the end of the season here?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Butler. I think that we're going to find out a lot more about them in the next couple weeks. I mean, they're playing. We're recording it at 8:46 Eastern on Tuesday. They play Butler tonight. I mean, they play Creighton tonight. Then they have home Villanova, home St. John's, and road trips to Xavier and Seton Hall. Coming out of
Yeah, it's
that,
big.
we're going to see if they're a tournament team or not. And then I think Creighton is going to be a top half team. McDermott's made some lineup changes. He's taken Owen Freeman and two other guys out of the starting lineup. Freeman's like barely playing. He's playing like 12 minutes a game, and maybe the most disappointing transfer in the country from a production standpoint. So I think those two teams are, Butler and Creighton are probably going to end up probably 5-6. But outside of that, I mean, I don't see Georgetown being that much better than DePaul. I mean, they've shown flashes. They look great for, the first 3 weeks of the season. They've fallen since then. Providence has been a massive disappointment. They play St. John's and UConn up next. They have the DePaul swing that DePaul just had. And, if they lose those two games, they're below 500. And Kim English is going to start feeling some heat. So I don't see a huge. I mean, Xavier, who knows? I mean, they have wins over West Virginia, Cincinnati. They've won at Georgetown. They also have a 30-something point loss to Creighton at home. So I think that there's those teams that we just saw. Those four teams are just wildly inconsistent. And then Marquette, like I said, I think Marquette's going to finish last or next last in the league. I just don't see really how it improves, and all the stuff going on there just is not going to help, obviously. And so I don't see. I mean, last year obviously it was kind of DePaul and Seton Hall at the bottom, and then a little bit of a gap to everyone else. I think that the bottom 4 or 5 teams in this league really have no chance to make the tournament. And I think there's going to be a pretty clear tier break after the first 5 or 6 teams.
I wanted to ask you, Jeff, about your evaluation of St. John's. Obviously, DePaul played them, a few weeks ago. They played well against them, but obviously they've lost to Kentucky recently, and they have some losses to ranked teams like Alabama, Auburn. How do you evaluate them as we head kind of into, the new year?
I mean, this is another situation like I just talked about where if you have a couple of misses in the portal, then your season's just not going to go the direction you thought. St. John's thought they could do without getting a pure point guard in the portal. They thought they could kind of figure it out with Ian Jackson or Dylan Darling or whoever they're going to give the ball to. And I could have probably told them Ian Jackson at the point guard spot wasn't going to work out. Super talented offensive player. Love him as a scorer. He's just not a pure point guard. He's not a Rick Pitino point guard. And they've tried a bunch of different guys at that spot. It hasn't worked. And so they've just kind of been missing something on the offensive end. Zuby Ejiofor is tremendous, and Dylan Mitchell's been kind of a Swiss Army knife type of player, but they just don't have that guy that can go create for others when it's needed. I think it's a bad sign. I mean, I forget which game it was, and their top assist guys were Zuby, Dylan Mitchell, and Bryce Hopkins. They're 3 biggest players on the floor. Like that's just not a consistent way. That's not a way to win consistently in 2025, 2026. Hopkins is another issue there. I mean, he's been good. He hasn't been what they thought he'd be, which was an all Big East player 2-3 years ago. Pitino's spoken about it publicly, and it's clear that Pitino is not thrilled with the makeup of his team. How much responsibility he's taken for that publicly is up for debate, but they're missing some things, and they're not playing defense nearly, like they did a season ago. Numbers wise, they're fine, but if you look in their games against good teams, Auburn, they gave up 85 points. Iowa State gave up 83 points. Kentucky, that second half was just abysmal. Alabama, they gave up 103. So, if you can't score consistently, usually you could, count on a Rick Pitino team to defend for 40 minutes. They're just not doing that at a high rate. Now, again, I mean, that's not going to totally take them out of the NCAA tournament hunt in the Big East. They could probably go through the motions and win a bunch of games this year. But for a preseason top 5 team, a team that thought they upgraded talent from last year, it hasn't happened.
Yeah, the Big East is very interesting this year. I think UConn is far and away, the best team in the conference, and they're 12-1, very, very talented team. And you hope DePaul can get a couple wins against some of the other teams. we'll see what happens in round two against St. John's at Wintrust. But it's shaping up to Paul. Hopefully they can win 5 or 6 games in the Big East. I guess
I
Scott,
mean, there's,
where
I mean, outside of UConn, I mean, how many teams in the Big East do you look at and say, this team is going to outplay DePaul for 40 minutes?
yeah, it's a
There's no
good
team in the
question.
league I feel that. I mean, even UConn. I mean, UConn, that game, it was a game for 20 minutes. But like, going into Villanova, Villanova has, they blew a lead late against Wisconsin. They were up 20 against Seton Hall. Seton
Yep.
Hall kind of crawled back. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that DePaul keeps it close. I think DePaul is going to be competitive in more games than it was last year.
And I think that's the key for Holtman. I know that he's spoken about it. He wants DePaul to be more competitive in these games because Jeff, I don't know if a couple of years ago, obviously they didn't win a single conference game and it was bad.
Familiar,
It
yeah.
it was bad.
To put it lightly, it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad. It was unwatchable basketball. So, um, but yeah, I think if they can be competitive in these games, and we saw them be competitive against UConn, and I think that obviously you don't want moral victories, but that's a big thing to be competitive in that first half against UConn, and obviously UConn pulled away. But I guess Scott, where we're at now, headed into the new year, I guess where do you see DePaul finishing? Because I know we had our predictions before the season, but where do you have them now?
I kind of have them in the 8 to 9 range. Again, I think that they have a chance to sneak a couple wins in there. And, this is a team that I feel has a lot to play for on an individual standpoint. Some of these programs that Jeff alluded to as they have disappointing seasons, like a Providence or a Georgetown, if things really crater, then it might get really bad there really quickly. But I think the optimism around this DePaul program, the way that they're trying to build pieces slowly, they kind of know where they are. They know who they are. There's nothing about the expectations that seem like they're not manageable for them. So again, I think they sneak a couple wins in there against some teams, particularly at home. They're not going to have the hot shooting stretches they had last year. They had outlier shooting games that would keep them in things and had them win a couple games late. But I think defensively, they're much more equipped to at least maintain that physicality needed to compete for 40 minutes at the Big East level.
Is that where you would have them around, Jeff? Around the 8-9 range?
Yeah, I think I probably lean more towards 9, but like, to me, they're not going to lose at home by 30 like Xavier did
Yeah.
to Creighton. Like, I don't know. I mean, like Scott said, I mean, the wheels can fall off some of these teams. And I just don't totally see that happening with DePaul. I think there's just, teams that have tournament-ish expectations when it's not going that direction come mid-February, guys start looking at the portal, guys start checking out. Um, you know, not to be negative about DePaul, but I don't think a lot of guys were like, "Oh, we're going to play in the tournament this year."
Hmm.
And so I think that they're playing for different things, and I think that's okay. And it just doesn't strike me as a team when watching them that they're going to be like, come February 15th, they're gonna be like, all right, let's I'm gonna keep one eye on the portal. This season's not going how we thought. I think they're gonna be able to sneak some wins. And like I said, it's not even though I watched them in two of their worst losses of the season margin wise, it just didn't strike me as a team that's gonna take a 30-point loss at home like Xavier did to Creighton. I don't think they're gonna have the off court social media drama that Marquette has. It's not like you look at compare it to Providence. I mean, Providence has more talent on paper. It's also a much more expensive roster that could be below 500 in the next week, and who knows what happens after that. I don't foresee some of the potential chemistry issues, locker room issues, drama that potentially face some other teams.
I agree, Jeff. And that is going to do it here on the recent episode of the Blue Demon Banter Podcast brought to you by We Are DePaul. Be sure to check out Scott and I's stories on We Are DePaul. Sign up for a free newsletter for all Blue Demon stuff in your inbox every morning. But thank you, Scott, and thank you, Jeff, for taking your time to talk DePaul basketball. Have a good rest of your evening and go Blue Demons.
Happy New Year, fellas. Thanks.
Happy New Year, everyone. We out.